Hero morality. Zarathustra became for Nietzsche a gospel whereon his later books were merely commentaries. If Europe would not appreciate his poetry, perhaps it would understand his prose. After the song of the prophet, the logic of the philosopher. What though the philosopher himself should disbelieve in logic? It is a tool of clarity, if not the seal of proof. He was more than ever alone now, for Zarathustra had seemed a little queer even to Nietzsche's friends. Scholars like Overbeck and Burckhardt, who had been his colleagues at Basel and had admired the birth of tragedy, mourned the loss of a brilliant philologist and could not celebrate the birth of a poet. His sister, who had almost justified his view that for a philosopher a sister is an admirable substitute for a wife, left him suddenly to marry one of those anti-Semites whom Nietzsche despised, and went off to Paraguay to found a communistic colony. She asked her pale, frail brother to come along for the sake of his health, but Nietzsche valued the life of the mind more than the health of the body. He wished to stay where the battle was. Europe was necessary to him as a culture museum. He lived irregularly in place and time. He tried Switzerland and Venice and Genoa and Nice and Turin. He liked to write amid the doves that flock about the lions of St. Mark. This Piazza San Marco is my finest workroom. But he had to follow Hamlet's advice about staying out of the sun, which hurt his ailing eyes. He shut himself up in dingy, heatless attics and worked behind closed blinds. Because of his failing eyes, he wrote henceforth no books, but only aphorisms. He gathered some of these fragments together under the titles Beyond Good and Evil, 1886, and The Genealogy of Morals, 1887. He hoped in these volumes to destroy the old morality and prepare the way for the morality of the Superman. For a moment he became the philologist again, and sought to enforce his new ethic with etymologies that are not quite beyond reproach. He observes that the German language contains two words for bad, schlecht and böse. Schlecht was applied by the upper to the lower classes and meant ordinary, common. Later it came to mean vulgar, worthless, bad. Böse was applied by the lower to the upper classes and meant unfamiliar, irregular, incalculable, dangerous, harmful, cruel. Napoleon was böse. Many simple peoples feared the exceptional individual as a disintegrating force. There is a Chinese proverb that the great man is a public misfortune. Likewise, gut had two meanings, as opposite to schlecht and böse. As used by the aristocracy, it meant strong, brave, powerful, warlike, godlike. Gut from Gott. As used by the people, it meant familiar, peaceful, harmless, kind. Here, then, were two contradictory valuations of human behavior, two ethical standpoints and criteria. A Herren moral and a Herden moral, a morality of masters and a morality of the herd. The former was the accepted standard in classical antiquity, especially among the Romans. Even for the ordinary Roman, virtue was virtus, manhood, courage, enterprise, bravery. But from Asia, and especially from the Jews in the days of their political subjection, came the other standard. Subjection breeds humility, helplessness breeds altruism, which is an appeal for help. Under this herd morality, love of danger and power gave way to love of security and peace. Strength was replaced by cunning, open by secret revenge, sternness by pity, initiative by imitation, the pride of honor by the whip of conscience. Honor is pagan, Roman, feudal, aristocratic. Conscience is Jewish, Christian, bourgeois, democratic. It was the eloquence of the prophets, from Amos to Jesus, that made the view of a subject class an almost universal ethic. The world and the flesh became synonyms of evil, and poverty a proof of virtue. This valuation was brought to a peak by Jesus. With him every man was of equal worth and had equal rights. Out of his doctrine came democracy, utilitarianism, socialism. Progress was now defined in terms of these plebeian philosophies, in terms of progressive equalization and vulgarization, in terms of decadence and descending life. The final stage in this decay is the exaltation of pity and self-sacrifice, the sentimental comforting of criminals, the inability of a society to excrete. Sympathy is legitimate if it is active, but pity is a paralyzing mental luxury, a waste of feeling for the irremediably botched, the incompetent, the defective, the vicious, the culpably diseased, and the irrevocably criminal. There is a certain indelicacy and intrusiveness in pity. Visiting the sick is an orgasm of superiority in the contemplation of our neighbor's helplessness. Behind all this morality is a secret will to power. Love itself is only a desire for possession. Courtship is combat, and mating is mastery. Don José kills Carmen to prevent her from becoming the property of another. People imagine that they are unselfish in love because they seek the advantage of another being, often in opposition to their own. But for so doing they want to possess the other being. L'amour est de tous les sentiments le plus égoïste, et par conséquent, lorsqu'il est blessé, le moins généreux. Love is of all feelings the most egoistic, and in consequence it is, when crossed, the least generous. Even in the love of truth is the desire to possess it, perhaps to be its first possessor, to find it virginal. Humility is the protective coloration of the will to power. Against this passion for power, reason and morality are helpless. They are but weapons in its hands, dupes of its game. Philosophical systems are shining mirages. What we see is not the long-sought truth, but the reflection of our own desires. The philosophers all pose as though their real opinions had been discovered through the self-evolving of a cold, pure, divinely indifferent dialectic, whereas in fact a prejudicial proposition, idea, or suggestion, which is generally their heart's desire, abstracted and refined, is defended by them with arguments sought out after the event. It is these underground desires, these pulsations of the will to power, that determine our thoughts. The greater part of our intellectual activity goes on unconsciously and unfelt by us. Conscious thinking is the weakest. Because instinct is the direct operation of the will to power, undisturbed by consciousness, instinct is the most intelligent of all kinds of intelligence which have hitherto been discovered. Indeed, the role of consciousness has been senselessly overestimated. Consciousness may be regarded as secondary, almost as indifferent and superfluous, probably destined to disappear and to be superseded by perfect automatism. In strong men there is very little attempt to conceal desire under the cover of reason. Their simple argument is, I will. In the uncorrupted vigor of the master soul, desire is its own justification, and conscience, pity, or remorse can find no entrance. But so far has the Judeo-Christian democratic point of view prevailed in modern times that even the strong are now ashamed of their strength and their health, and begin to seek reasons. The aristocratic virtues and valuations are dying out. Europe is threatened with a new Buddhism. Even Schopenhauer and Wagner become pitiful Buddhists. The whole of the morality of Europe is based upon the values which are useful to the herd. The strong are no longer permitted to exercise their strength. They must become as far as possible like the weak. Goodness is to do nothing for which we are not strong enough. Has not Kant, that great Chinaman of Königsberg, proved that men must never be used as a means? Consequently, the instincts of the strong, to hunt, to fight, to conquer, and to rule, are introverted into self-laceration for lack of outlet. They beget asceticism and the bad conscience. All instincts which do not find a vent turn inward. This is what I mean by the growing internalization of man. Here we have the first form of what came to be called the soul. The formula for decay is that the virtues proper to the herd infect the leaders and break them into common clay. Moral systems must be compelled first of all to bow before the gradations of rank. Their presumption must be driven home to their conscience, until they thoroughly understand at last that it is immoral to say that what is right for one is proper for another. Different functions require different qualities, and the evil virtues of the strong are as necessary in a society as the good virtues of the weak. Severity, violence, danger, war are as valuable as kindliness and peace. Great individuals appear only in times of danger and violence and merciless necessity. The best thing in man is strength of will, power, and permanence of passion. Without passion, one is mere milk, incapable of deeds. Greed, envy, even hatred are indispensable items in the process of struggle, selection, and survival. Evil is to good as variation to heredity, as innovation and experiment to custom. There is no development without an almost criminal violation of precedents and order. If evil were not good, it would have disappeared. We must beware of being too good. Man must become better and more evil. Nietzsche is consoled to find so much evil and cruelty in the world. He takes a sadistic pleasure in reflecting on the extent to which, he thinks, cruelty constituted the great joy and delight of ancient man. And he believes that our pleasure in the tragic drama or in anything sublime is a refined and vicarious cruelty. Man is the cruelest animal, says Zarathustra. When gazing at tragedies, bullfights, and crucifixions, he hath hitherto felt happier than at any other time on earth. And when he invented hell, lo, hell was his heaven on earth. He could put up with suffering now by contemplating the eternal punishment of his oppressors in the other world. The ultimate ethic is biological. We must judge things according to their value for life. We need a physiological transvaluation of all values. The real test of a man or a group or a species is energy, capacity, power. We may be partly reconciled to the 19th century, otherwise so destructive of all the higher virtues, by its emphasis on the physical. The soul is a function of an organism. One drop of blood too much or too little in the brain may make a man suffer more than Prometheus suffered from the vulture. Varying foods have varying mental effects. Rice makes for Buddhism, and German metaphysics is the result of beer. A philosophy, therefore, is true or false according as it is the expression and exaltation of ascending or of descending life. The decadent says, life is worth nothing. Let him rather say, I am worth nothing. Why should life be worth living when all the heroic values in it have been permitted to decay, and democracy, that is, disbelief in all great men, ruins with every decade another people? The gregarious European man nowadays assumes an air as if he were the only kind of man that is allowable. He glorifies his qualities, such as public spirit, kindness, deference, industry, temperance, modesty, indulgence, sympathy, by virtue of which he is gentle and durable and useful to the herd, as the peculiarly human virtues. In cases, however, where it is believed that the leader and bellwether cannot be dispensed with, attempt after attempt is made nowadays to replace commanders by the summoning together of clever, gregarious men. All representative constitutions, for example, are of this origin. In spite of all, what a blessing, what a deliverance from a weight becoming unendurable is the appearance of an absolute ruler for these gregarious Europeans. Of this fact, the effect of the appearance of Napoleon was the last great proof. The history of the influence of Napoleon is almost the history of the higher happiness to which the entire century has attained in its worthiest individuals and periods. The